The air in the great hall was thick enough to be carved. It tasted of old stone, beeswax, and the simmering aggression of 24 powerful wolves confined to their human forms. Evangeline Mercer, beta advisor to the Alpha King, stood at Sebastian's left shoulder, a place she had occupied for the better part of a decade. She was a fixture, as reliable and unnoticed as the granite pillars that held the vaulted ceiling aloft. Her scent was a muted, earthy thing, the scent of a beta, of stability, of someone who posed no threat and sought no advancement beyond her station. It allowed her to move through the treacherous currents of the court unseen, her mind her only weapon. And it was a formidable one. Today, that mind was focused entirely on the wolf sitting across the massive oak table, Alpha Victor Crane of the Stonefang Pack. He was all sharp angles and predatory stillness, his ambition a foul stench that even her beta senses could detect. The treaty laid out between them, a document Evangeline had spent 6 months drafting, was meant to end a century of border disputes. It was her magnum opus. She felt a familiar, quiet pride in its intricate clauses, its careful balance of concession and strength. Sebastian's presence beside her was a mountain of calm, his power a low hum that soothed the frayed nerves of his delegation. He trusted her. That trust was the foundation of her entire life. 10 years of proving herself indispensable, of earning respect through relentless competence. A strange warmth began to curl in her lower abdomen. Evangeline dismissed it as nerves, a flicker of anxiety for the treaty's success. She drew a slow, steadying breath, her gaze fixed on Victor. He was sneering at Clause 12b, the one concerning timber rights. It was a bluff, she knew. His true target was the mineral access in the northern hills, but he was posturing, trying to wring out one more concession. She leaned forward, her voice low and even, meant only for Sebastian. "He's deflecting, Your Majesty. He knows the timber clause is ironclad. He wants you to offer a compromise on the mines." Sebastian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his only acknowledgement. He didn't need to look at her. They had perfected this silent language of statecraft over 10 years of working side by side. It was their dance, their shared rhythm, her mind and his power moving as one. But the warmth intensified, spreading through her veins like a slow-acting poison. It felt sweet, floral. She frowned. The hall was kept clear of all perfumes during negotiations to prevent scent manipulation. A prickle of sweat traced its way down her spine. Something was wrong. Her focus, usually so absolute, began to fray at the edges. The muted scents of the room were suddenly exploding into a symphony of overwhelming detail. She could smell the faint anxiety on the junior beta to her right, the stale wine on a Stonefang emissary's breath from the night before, the sharp, clean ozone of Sebastian's power, a scent that had always been a comforting background note, but was now a resonant chord that vibrated deep in her bones, calling to something she didn't understand. And under it all, a new scent, one she had never smelled before. It was peaches and night-blooming jasmine, a fragrance so potent, so achingly sweet, it made her dizzy. It was coming from her. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the strange, syrupy heat. This was impossible. She was 30 years old, a beta. Betas did not suddenly change. Her scent was fixed, her place in the hierarchy cemented since puberty. Yet, there was no denying it. The scent was pouring from her, a fragrant, undeniable announcement. A late presentation. It was the stuff of whispers, of cautionary tales told to pups. A sign of deep, unresolved trauma that had fractured the wolf from the human, suppressing one's true nature. The massacre. The thought came unbidden, a ghost from a past she had buried under a decade of relentless work and discipline. Fire and screaming and the smell of blood. She had been 6 years old, the sole survivor. They had said the trauma had likely muted her, settled her as a beta. They were wrong. It hadn't muted her, it had hidden her. The warmth crested, becoming a wave of heat that made her gasp. The scent of peaches and jasmine exploded into the room, no longer a subtle bloom, but a fragrant detonation. Every head in the hall snapped towards her. The low murmur of negotiation died instantly, replaced by a suffocating silence. Victor Crane's eyes, once fixed on the treaty, were now locked on her, his nostrils flaring. The calculating look was gone, replaced by something raw and possessive, but it was the reaction from the man beside her that shattered her world. Alpha King Sebastian Vane, who had treated her with nothing but professional respect for 10 years, turned his head slowly. His eyes, usually a calm, steady brown, were blazing with a molten gold fire she had only ever seen in the height of a true alpha's rage. His wolf was at the surface, staring at her, through her. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of primal, absolute recognition that had nothing to do with treaties or kings, and everything to do with the wolf. Her knees went weak. The scent pouring from her was not just any scent, it was the scent of an omega. And the look in her king's eyes was not just that of an alpha, it was the look of a male who had just found the one thing he had been born to protect, born to claim: his mate. Sebastian felt the shift before he smelled it. A subtle disturbance in the room's energy, a flicker of heat where there should have been none. He was on the verge of countering Victor's feint, preparing to pivot the conversation back to the mineral rights, as Evangeline had advised, when the scent hit him. Peaches. Jasmine. A fragrance so intoxicatingly pure and sweet, it bypassed his mind and struck his wolf like a bolt of lightning. His inner beast, a creature of immense power he kept leashed under layers of regal control, surged forward with a violence that took his breath away. It roared a single, triumphant word that echoed in the core of his soul: mine. The world narrowed to a single point of focus, the source of that scent: Evangeline, his advisor, his steady, reliable, brilliant beta who had stood at his side for 10 years, who knew his strategies before he spoke them, who could dismantle an opponent's argument with surgical precision, who made him laugh with her dry observations during tedious council meetings, who had somehow become essential to his existence without him ever noticing the exact moment it happened. But she was not a beta. Not anymore. The scent was pouring from her, an impossible, miraculous tide of omega essence, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever encountered. It was the scent he had been searching for his entire life, the scent his wolf had yearned for in its sleep, the scent of his other half, his mate. His wolf had always known, hadn't it? All those times his beast had settled after their strategy sessions, the inexplicable contentment he felt in her presence, the way his eyes sought her out in crowded rooms. It had been trying to tell him. And he, fool that he was, had dismissed it as respect for a valued colleague. His control, forged over 35 years of discipline and duty, shattered into a million pieces. The gold of his wolf bled into his eyes, turning them into molten suns. A possessive growl tore from his throat, a sound that was not kingly or diplomatic, but purely animal. It was a warning to every other male in the room. Back off. She is mine. The hall had fallen silent. Every wolf, from the lowest emissary to Alpha Victor himself, was staring, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. He saw the predatory gleam in Victor's eyes as he inhaled Evangeline's scent, saw the calculating assessment, and a wave of murderous rage so potent it made him tremble washed over him. He wanted to rip the other alpha's throat out for daring to even look at her, for daring to breathe the same air. He fought it down, his knuckles white where he gripped the arms of his throne-like chair. He was a king. He was in the middle of a treaty negotiation, but his wolf cared for none of that. His wolf cared only for the trembling woman by his side, for the way her scent called to him like a siren song, for the primal need to gather her into his arms and never let go. He forced himself to look at her, really look at her. Evangeline was pale, her usual composure fractured. Her eyes, normally a calm, intelligent gray, were wide with terror and confusion. She was looking at him, and in her gaze he saw not the recognition of a mate, but the fear of a subordinate whose world had just been upended in the most public and humiliating way possible. The realization was a splash of icy water on his wolf's fury. She didn't understand yet. Or her wolf was still too new, too shocked by its own emergence to recognize him fully. The trauma. He knew her history, of course, the sole survivor of the Blackwood Creek massacre. He had always admired her resilience, her ability to build such a formidable career from the ashes of her past. Now he understood. That resilience had been a cage, locking her true nature away. And now the lock had broken, and she was terrified. He had to protect her. The thought was as instinctual as breathing. The wolves in this room were sharks that had just scented blood. They saw a late-blooming omega, an anomaly, a potential weakness. His wolf saw his queen. The woman who had stood beside him through 3 border conflicts, 2 assassination attempts, and countless political minefields. The woman whose mind was sharper than any blade. The woman he had been falling in love with for 10 years without even knowing it. He had to regain control. He forced the gold from his eyes, a feat that took every ounce of his willpower. He pushed his wolf back, ignoring its furious snarls of protest. He needed to be the king right now, not the mate. "There appears to be a temporary disruption," Sebastian said, his voice a low command that brooked no argument. He infused it with his alpha authority, forcing the others to lower their gazes, to submit. "We will take a recess." He stood, the scraping of his chair deafening in the silence. He didn't dare touch Evangeline, though every cell in his body screamed to pull her into his arms, to wrap her in his scent and shield her from the prying eyes. Victor Crane rose slowly, a smug, contemptuous smirk playing on his lips. "A disruption," he purred, his eyes still fixed on Evangeline. "I would call it a revelation, Vane." Sebastian's hand clenched into a fist at his side. He could feel the vibration of his own growl building again. "This discussion is over, Crane," he bit out. Victor's smirk widened. "On the contrary, I believe it has just become far more interesting. In fact, I have a new term for our treaty." He let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. Then he looked directly at Evangeline, his gaze stripping her bare. "I want her." The words hung in the air, dripping with poison. "I want her." Evangeline felt the blood drain from her face, a cold dread washing over the strange, feverish heat. Victor Crane was looking at her as if she were a prize mare at an auction, a piece of property to be bartered. Humiliation, sharp and bitter, burned in her throat. For 10 years, she had been defined by her mind. She was Evangeline Mercer, the architect of the kingdom's foreign policy, the voice of reason, the king's most trusted advisor. The woman who had negotiated the Eastern Grain Treaty, who had prevented the Northern Rebellion, who had built her entire identity on being indispensable through sheer intellect. Now, in the space of a single heartbeat, she had been reduced to an object, an omega, a prize. The part of her that was still the strategist, the diplomat, screamed in outrage. But another part, a new and terrified part, simply wanted to run, to hide from the predatory eyes and the suffocating weight of her new reality. She felt Sebastian shift beside her, a wave of pure, murderous fury rolling off him. His wolf was back, barely contained, a tangible presence promising violence. He was going to kill Victor. He was going to start a war right here in the Great Hall, all for her. The thought was both terrifying and, strangely, thrilling. But she could not let that happen. She had spent her career preventing wars, not starting them. This was her disaster. She had to control it. Before Sebastian could speak, before his rage could detonate and shatter the fragile peace, Evangeline took a half-step forward. The movement was small, but it was a reclaiming of space, a declaration that she was not a statue to be gawked at. She lifted her chin, meeting Victor Crane's gaze directly. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she forced her voice to be as cold and sharp as splintered ice. "Alpha Crane," she began, the formal address a deliberate distancing. "I believe you are confused. Perhaps the altitude of the capital is affecting your reasoning." A few of the king's delegations stifled shocked coughs. A beta, no, an omega, did not address a rival alpha with such disdain. "I am not a line item in a treaty. I am not a parcel of land or a shipment of grain to be traded." She let her eyes sweep over him, a slow, deliberate assessment that mirrored his own insulting gaze moments before. But hers was not possessive. It was dismissive. "You speak of wanting me as a term of this agreement. Let me be clear." She paused, letting the silence amplify her next words. "Even if I were the last female on this continent, and you were the last male, I would sooner offer myself to the vultures of the sun-scorched plains than accept a place in your bed or your pack." The insult was so profound, so layered with contempt, that a collective gasp went through the hall. Victor's smug expression vanished, replaced by a mask of incandescent fury, his face mottled with red. "You insolent little," he began, taking a step forward. "Enough!" Sebastian's voice cracked like a whip, laced with the full, unbridled power of the Alpha King. Victor froze mid-step, his body forced into submission by the sheer weight of Sebastian's command. But Evangeline wasn't finished. She had spent a decade verbally disarming men far more powerful than Victor Crane. "You seek to possess me, to gain leverage over Alpha King Sebastian," she continued, her voice ringing with clarity and conviction. "It is a transparent and frankly pathetic strategy. It shows you believe the only value a female holds is as a weakness to be exploited. A kingdom led by a wolf with such a primitive worldview is not a kingdom destined for prosperity. It is a kingdom destined to crumble from the rot within." She gave him a small, pitying smile. "So, no, Alpha Crane, you cannot have me. Not as a treaty term, not as a prize, and not in your most feverish, self-aggrandizing dreams. Now, if you are quite finished posturing, we have a treaty to conclude. Or are the Stonefang mines not as important to you as your bruised ego?" She stepped back, her movement fluid, and turned her gaze to Sebastian, a silent transfer of power. "I have done my part, now you do yours." The hall was utterly silent. No one had ever spoken to an alpha like that, let alone a new omega in the midst of her presentation. She had not used claws or fangs, but she had eviscerated him more completely than any physical blow could have. She risked a glance at Sebastian. The molten gold in his eyes was still there, but the rage had been tempered by something else. Awe. And a fierce, burning pride that warmed her more than the strange inner fire. He was looking at her not as a problem to be solved, but as the brilliant, formidable woman he had always known, now revealed in a new and dazzling light. And for just a heartbeat, their eyes met, and she saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch, something that looked dangerously like devotion. The treaty was, for all intents and purposes, dead. Victor Crane, his face a thunderous mask of humiliation, had stormed from the hall with his delegation, spitting threats of retribution. The fragile peace Evangeline had worked so tirelessly to build had been shattered. Not by a clause or a counteroffer, but by her own biology. As the great oak doors slammed shut behind him, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The adrenaline that had fueled her defiant speech drained away, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the terrifying reality of her situation. The hall began to empty as Sebastian dismissed the court with a curt, non-negotiable gesture. But Evangeline remained rooted to the spot, feeling the eyes of the departing courtiers on her back. They were whispers, stares, pitying and speculative glances. Yesterday she was the respected beta advisor. Today she was a spectacle, a freak of nature. Sebastian did not move from her side. The world had shrunk to the space between them, charged with an energy that was both terrifying and magnetic. He hadn't touched her, hadn't spoken a word directly to her since her verbal assault on Victor, but his presence was a fortress around her. His wolf was a silent, watchful guardian, and she could feel it, the pull of him, the way her new senses catalogued everything about him. The warmth of his body even though he stood 2 feet away, the barely restrained power that hummed beneath his skin, the way his hands flexed at his sides as if fighting the urge to reach for her. "Evangeline," he finally said, his voice softer now, the Alpha King receding to reveal the man. The sound of her name on his lips was different. It held a new weight, a new resonance that vibrated through her. Not Lady Mercer or advisor, just Evangeline, like she was something precious. "Are you all right?" She wanted to laugh. Was she all right? Her entire identity had been stripped from her in a matter of minutes. Her career was likely over. A rival alpha wanted to kidnap her, and her own king, the man she had served faithfully for 10 years, was looking at her like she was his. She felt a hysterical bubble of laughter rise and choked it back down. "I am uncertain, Your Majesty," she managed, her voice a thin, reedy thing she barely recognized. "That is an entirely appropriate response," he said, a faint, wry twist to his lips. He finally moved, taking a step closer. The air crackled. His scent, that clean, powerful ozone and pine, wrapped around her, and her new, traitorous senses drank it in. Her wolf, this new, bewildering presence within her, purred in appreciation. It wanted to get closer, to press against him, to be enveloped by his strength. The instinct was so strong, so overwhelming, it made her flinch away. Sebastian stopped immediately, his expression softening with concern and a flicker of hurt that made her chest ache. "I will not harm you, Evangeline. My wolf wants to be near you." The thought was not her own, and it startled her so much she almost said it aloud. It was the Omega, this new voice in her head, whispering its desires with an urgency that terrified her. She shook her head, trying to clear it. "I know, it's not you, it's this. It's all happening too fast." The chaos of the past hour was finally catching up to her. The courtyard outside the Great Hall was a blur of motion as the Stonefang delegation prepared their hasty departure. Sebastian's royal guards, the Crimson Guard, formed a wary perimeter. He began to lead her towards a private exit, his hand hovering near the small of her back, a gesture of protection so potent she could feel its heat through the fabric of her tunic. Every instinct in her screamed to lean back into that almost touch, to let him guide her, to surrender to the safety he offered. But she was afraid that if she gave in even an inch, she would lose herself entirely. That was when it happened. A sharp whistle cut through the air. From the shadows of the colonnade, 4 of Victor's wolves, huge and snarling, burst forth. They moved with brutal efficiency, ignoring the guards and heading straight for her. It was an ambush, a brazen attempt to snatch her right from under the king's nose, to claim what Victor believed was his by right of demand. Chaos erupted. The Crimson Guard clashed with Victor's brutes, the clang of steel and the snarls of half-shifted wolves echoing off the stone. But 2 of them broke through the line, their eyes locked on Evangeline. There was no time to think, no time to run. One of them lunged, his claws extended, aiming for her. She cried out, stumbling backward. And then Sebastian was there. He moved with a speed that was not human. He threw himself in front of her, his body a living shield. The attacker's claws, meant for her, tore across Sebastian's chest and arm. A terrible, ripping sound. The smell of blood, his blood, hit her like a physical blow. Sebastian roared, a sound of pure agony and fury, but he didn't fall. He didn't even flinch away. He spun, his own claws, long and silver, flashing from his fingertips as his wolf surged to the surface. He struck the attacker across the face, a blow that sent the wolf flying backward with a sickening crunch of bone. The second attacker hesitated, stunned by the king's ferocity. It was all the opening Sebastian needed. Despite the blood pouring from the deep gashes in his chest, despite the way his hand shook as he pressed it to the wound in his side, he moved on the offensive. He was no longer a king. He was a primeval force, an alpha defending his mate. He fought with a savagery that was terrifying and beautiful to behold, each movement precise and brutal, his only thought to keep her safe. He was protecting her. He was dying for her. The thought screamed in her mind, drowning out everything else. The sight of his blood, so red against the white stone, so much of it, broke through her shock. He staggered, one hand pressing against the deepest wound in his side. He was hurt. Badly. The Crimson Guard finally subdued the attackers, but the damage was done. Sebastian's legs gave out. He collapsed to his knees, his golden eyes finding hers through a haze of pain. "Evangeline," he gasped, his voice strained. "Safe." Then he pitched forward onto the cold stone floor, unconscious. The world dissolved into a cacophony of shouts, running feet, and the metallic scent of Sebastian's blood. Evangeline didn't hear any of it. Her entire being was focused on the still figure on the ground. She rushed to his side, her knees hitting the cold, blood-slicked stone. "Sebastian!" His name was a ragged cry torn from her throat, not "Your Majesty" or "My King," but his name, raw and desperate. She reached for him, her hands hovering over the terrible wounds that marred his chest and side. The fabric of his royal tunic was shredded and soaked a deep, alarming crimson. He was pale, his breathing shallow. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the known world, was broken at her feet. Because of her. Guilt, sharp and suffocating, clawed at her. This was her fault. Her presentation, her defiance, her very existence had led to this. The man who had never been anything but respectful, who had trusted her with the fate of kingdoms, who had just thrown his body between her and death. He was bleeding out on the stone because of her. Medics from the royal household swarmed the scene, their faces grim. They moved with practiced efficiency, barking orders for plasma, for silver sutures, for lunar herbs to stave off infection. They tried to gently move her aside, but she wouldn't budge. She couldn't. "Let me," she said, her voice shaking but firm. One of the medics, an older beta named Elias, whom she had known for years, looked at her with pity. "Lady Evangeline, this is no place for you. You are in shock. Let us handle this." "No," she insisted, a strange certainty settling over her. Her hands, which had been trembling, were now steady. "Let me help." She didn't know where the knowledge came from, didn't understand the instinct that guided her, but she knew what to do. It was ancient and deep, the Omega's imperative to heal, to soothe, to care for her Alpha. Her hands finally made contact with his skin, pressing gently against the edges of the least severe wound on his arm. The moment she touched him, something inside her shifted and settled, like a lock clicking into place. A soft, warm light, the color of pale honey, bloomed from her palms. The medics gasped. Elias's eyes went wide. It was a faint power, untrained and weak, but it was undeniably the healing touch of an Omega bonded to her mate. The bleeding slowed, the torn flesh knitting together by a fraction. It was not enough to heal such grievous injuries, but it was something. It was hope. And as she poured what little strength she had into him, she felt it. The bond. A golden thread connecting her soul to his, thrumming with life even as he lay unconscious. He was hers, and she would not let him go. They moved him to his private chambers, a suite of rooms Evangeline had only ever entered for the most confidential of state briefings. Now the space felt achingly intimate. He was laid upon his massive bed, stripped to the waist while the medics worked feverishly to save his life. The alpha scent in the room was overwhelming, thick with pain but still powerful. It should have been intimidating, should have triggered her new Omega instincts to submit or flee. But instead, her wolf found it deeply comforting. It recognized this place as the heart of his territory, his den, and some primal part of her insisted she belonged here. She refused to leave his side. The council urged her to rest, to go to the prepared guest quarters, but she shook her head, her eyes never leaving Sebastian's pale face. She sat in a chair pulled up beside the bed, a silent, unmovable sentinel. For hours she watched them work, her heart seizing every time his breathing faltered. She poured what little energy she had into him, her hands resting on his arm, letting the faint honeyed light flow. It was a minuscule contribution compared to the medic's skill, but his wolf, even unconscious, seemed to sense her presence. His agitated state would calm whenever she was near, his breathing evening out. The bond, still new and unacknowledged, was a tangible thread between them, a conduit for her desperate will for him to live. By dawn, the crisis had passed. The medics, exhausted but relieved, declared him stable. The wounds were deep, and one had come dangerously close to his heart. But his alpha healing abilities, bolstered by their care and her touch, would see him through. They left, leaving Evangeline alone with him in the quiet room. The rising sun cast long shadows across the floor. She looked at him, truly looked at him, not as her king, but as the man who had thrown himself in front of claws for her. His face, usually a mask of command, was unguarded in sleep. There were lines of stress around his eyes she had never noticed before, a faint scar bisecting one eyebrow. His hair, always so carefully styled, was mussed and falling across his forehead. He looked younger like this, vulnerable. The thought made her chest ache with a tenderness that was utterly foreign. She reached out, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, careful to avoid the bandages. His skin was warm beneath her touch, rough with stubble. A low rumble, almost inaudible, vibrated from his chest. A purr. Even in sleep, his wolf recognized her touch, responded to her presence. She felt the bond pulse between them, warm and insistent, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she didn't pull away from it. "Oh, Sebastian," she whispered, the name feeling both forbidden and perfectly right on her tongue. "What have I done?" "You did nothing," a weak voice rasped. Her head snapped up. His eyes were open, the brilliant gold faded back to a soft, weary brown. He was looking at her, his gaze clear and focused despite the pain she knew he must be in. "You did nothing but be who you were always meant to be." A tear she hadn't realized she was holding back slipped down her cheek. He saw it, and his expression tightened with a pain that had nothing to do with his injuries. He tried to lift his hand, but winced, the effort too much. She caught his hand in both of hers, lifting it and pressing his knuckles to her cheek. His skin was rough, calloused, the hand of a warrior king, and it felt like coming home. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "You almost died because of me." "Victor would have tried to take you regardless of your words," he said, his voice gaining a little strength. "Your defiance only proved what I already knew, what my wolf knew the moment your scent changed." He took a slow breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are no one's prize, Evangeline. You are a queen." She shook her head, a broken sound escaping her throat. "I'm not. I spent 10 years being invisible, being useful, and now I'm neither." "You were never invisible to me," he said, and the quiet conviction in his voice made her freeze. "Do you know what my wolf did every time we finished a strategy session?" It settled, calmed. "For 10 years I thought it was simply satisfaction with our progress, respect for your brilliant mind. But it was more than that, wasn't it? My wolf recognized you long before I did. It knew you were essential. It knew you were mine." The possessive word should have frightened her. Instead, it sent a shiver of warmth through her chest. "I don't understand any of this," she admitted, her voice small. "I don't know how to be what you need, what the kingdom needs." "Then we'll figure it out together," he said simply. "You've stood beside me through 3 border conflicts, 2 assassination attempts, and more political crises than I can count. Do you truly think I would face this without you?" He squeezed her hand, his thumb stroking over her knuckles in a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. "You are my mate, Evangeline. But more than that, you are my partner. The woman I have been falling in love with for 10 years without even realizing it." The words hit her like a physical blow. Love. Not just the mate bond, not just biology or fate. Love. She stared at him, at the sincerity in his eyes, at the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world, and something inside her cracked wide open. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "So am I," he admitted, a faint smile touching his lips. "But I would rather face this terror with you than face a lifetime of safety without you." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his, careful of his injuries. The gesture felt more intimate than any kiss, a meeting of souls. She could feel his breath against her lips, could see the flecks of gold returning to his eyes as his wolf pressed close to the surface, content just to be near her. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Neither do I," he replied, "but I know I need you, all of you. The brilliant advisor who just verbally destroyed a rival alpha, the fierce woman who won't be caged, and the omega who makes my wolf finally understand what peace feels like." He paused, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Stay with me, Evangeline. Not because the bond demands it, because you choose to." And in that moment, in the gray dawn light, with his blood still staining her clothes and the weight of an uncertain future pressing down on them both, she realized something that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She was falling in love with him too. Maybe she had been for years, hiding it under professionalism and propriety. Or maybe it was new, born from this crucible of crisis. She didn't know. But as she looked into his eyes and saw her own feelings reflected back at her, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't ready to let him go. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." The days that followed were a strange mixture of quiet intimacy and external pressure. Sebastian's recovery was slow but steady, his powerful alpha constitution fighting off the lingering effects of his wounds. The king's private chambers became Evangeline's entire world. She refused to leave his side, claiming her presence aided his healing, a fact the medics, having witnessed her omega's touch, could not deny. In truth, she couldn't bear to be apart from him. The bond, now awakened in both of them, was a constant humming current. When she was near, his wolf was calm and focused on healing. When she left the room for even a moment, a restless anxiety would stir in him, his heart rate increasing, his healing slowing. And she felt it too, a sharp, aching loneliness that pierced her chest the moment she stepped beyond the threshold, as if part of her soul remained behind with him. They talked for hours, filling the quiet spaces of his recovery. He asked about her childhood before the massacre, and she found herself speaking of things she hadn't thought of in decades. The scent of her mother's baking, the feel of her father's strong hand in hers, the wild, joyful freedom of her first near shift as a pup. She told him how she had buried it all, how she had built the persona of the logical, scentless beta as a suit of armor. "I think I knew, even then, that I was hiding," she admitted one afternoon, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the coverlet. "I was so afraid of being weak, of being vulnerable. So I became indispensable instead. If I was useful enough, valuable enough, no one could hurt me." "And did it work?" he asked softly. She looked at him, at the bandages still wrapped around his chest, at the evidence of exactly how much he'd been hurt because of her. "No," she said. "It just meant I was alone." He caught her hand, stilling her restless movements. "You're not alone anymore." The simple statement, spoken with such quiet certainty, made her eyes burn. In return, he spoke of the crushing weight of the crown he'd inherited too young, the loneliness of the alpha at the top, the endless search for a mate who was not just a political match, but a true partner. He confessed that his wolf had recognized her as essential long before the scent change. My wolf was always calmer after our strategy meetings, he admitted, a faint flush on his cheeks that she found utterly endearing. It never understood why. It just knew it needed to be near you. I thought it was merely respect for your counsel. He looked at her, his brown eyes dark with emotion. I was a fool. I saw the advisor, but I was blind to the woman right in front of me. To be fair, Evangeline said, a wry smile tugging at her lips, I did spend 10 years perfecting the art of being invisible. I was very good at my job. He laughed, a real, warm sound that made something flutter in her chest, then winced as the movement pulled at his healing wounds. Too good, he said, once he'd caught his breath. But you're not invisible anymore, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel that way again. These moments were a balm to her frayed soul, but they were also dangerous. Dangerous because every conversation drew her deeper, made her feel more, made her want things she'd never allowed herself to want before. One night, unable to sleep, she watched him in the dim light of the dying fire. His chest rose and fell with steady breaths, his face peaceful in sleep. She found herself cataloging details she'd never noticed before. The way his eyelashes cast shadows on his cheeks, the slight cleft in his chin, the strength in his hands even in repose. He was beautiful. The thought came unbidden and it startled her. She'd spent 10 years seeing him as her king, her employer, her duty. When had he become Sebastian? When had she started noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, or the way his voice softened when he spoke to her? When had her heart started racing every time he was near? Oh God, the realization hit her like a physical blow. She was in love with him. Not because of the mate bond, though she could feel it thrumming between them like a living thing. Not because he'd nearly died for her, though the memory of his blood on the stone still haunted her dreams. She was in love with him because of who he was, because he saw her, because he'd looked at her in the midst of her worst nightmare and seen not a problem to be solved, but a queen. Because he made her laugh even when she was terrified, because he'd spent 10 years earning her trust without either of them realizing he was also earning her heart. The knowledge terrified her. What if the bond was clouding her judgment? What if this feeling was just biology, just her omega responding to her alpha? What if she accepted him and lost herself in the process, became everything she'd feared, decorative, powerless, caged? As if sensing her turmoil, Sebastian stirred. His eyes opened, finding hers immediately in the darkness. Can't sleep? He asked, his voice rough with sleep. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. He studied her for a long moment, then carefully shifted over on the massive bed, wincing slightly. He patted the space beside him. Come here. Sebastian, your injuries will heal faster if my mate is not torturing herself in that chair. He raised an eyebrow. Please, Evangeline. I can feel your distress through the bond. It's keeping us both awake. She hesitated, then rose from the chair. The bed dipped as she carefully settled beside him, maintaining a careful distance. He made a dissatisfied sound and, moving slowly, wrapped an arm around her waist and drew her against his uninjured side. She stiffened, then gradually relaxed into his warmth. Her head rested on his shoulder, her hand settling carefully on his chest above the bandages. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, and the bond between them pulsed with contentment. Tell me what you're afraid of, he murmured into her hair. Everything, she wanted to say. I'm afraid of losing myself. I'm afraid of not being enough. I'm afraid that loving you will break me. But what came out was, what if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough to be what you need? His arm tightened around her. Evangeline, you verbally eviscerated a rival alpha in front of his entire delegation. You've prevented wars, negotiated impossible treaties, and held this kingdom together through crises that would have broken lesser minds. You are the strongest person I know. That was before, she said. Before this. Before I became an omega, he finished gently. You think that makes you weak? The council does. The council is a collection of old wolves who fear change, he said dismissively. They see your designation and think they know what it means. They don't see what I see. And what do you see? She asked, almost afraid of the answer. He shifted so he could look down at her, his eyes serious. I see a woman who has spent her entire life proving she's more than what people expect. I see someone who took the worst trauma imaginable and forged it into unbreakable strength. I see the person who knows me better than I know myself, who challenges me, who makes me want to be better. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I see my queen, Evangeline. Not in spite of what you are, but because of all of it. The advisor, the survivor, the omega, the woman. All of you. His words wrapped around her heart, and she realized that the bond wasn't clouding her judgment. It was clarifying it. It was showing her what had always been true, what she'd been too afraid to see. She loved him. Not because fate demanded it, but because he was Sebastian. Because he saw all of her and loved what he found. I'm falling in love with you, she whispered, the confession escaping before she could stop it. And it terrifies me. His breath caught, and when she dared to look up at him, his eyes were shining. I've been in love with you for longer than I knew, he said. Probably from the moment you told Lord Valerius his trade proposal had all the strategic depth of a puddle. You were magnificent then, and you're magnificent now. A surprised laugh bubbled out of her. That was 3 years ago. I know, he said, a smile playing at his lips. My wolf knew before I did. It's been waiting very impatiently for me to catch up. She found herself smiling back, and then somehow they were leaning closer, the space between them charged with electricity. His hand slid into her hair, and his forehead came to rest against hers. Can I kiss you? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Please, she breathed. The kiss was gentle, reverent, nothing like the desperate passion she'd read about in novels. His lips were soft against hers, moving slowly, carefully, as if she were something precious that might shatter. But the tenderness of it made her ache more than any fierce claiming could have. This wasn't about possession or dominance. This was about choice. About two people finding each other despite everything. She kissed him back, pouring everything she couldn't say into it, her fear and her hope, her love and her trust. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, his eyes had gone gold again, and she knew hers must be reflecting the same wonder she saw in his face. My mate, he murmured, pressing kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. My Evangeline. My Sebastian, she replied, testing the words. They felt right. He smiled against her skin. I like the way you say my name. I've never said it before, she realized. It was always Your Majesty or My King. Say it again, he requested, his voice low and intimate. Sebastian. Again. Sebastian, she said, and this time she kissed him. They fell asleep like that, tangled together, the bond between them singing with contentment. And for the first time since her presentation, Evangeline felt not trapped, but free. But beyond the heavy oak doors of the king's chambers, a storm was gathering. The Royal Council, a body of aging traditionalist alphas, was in an uproar. Sebastian, still confined to his bed for another week, was forced to meet with them in his chambers, and Evangeline, refusing to be dismissed, sat quietly in her chair by his side, a silent witness to their arguments. Lord Valerius, the council's grizzled head, was the most vocal. Your Majesty, the situation is untenable. A late-blooming Omega, one who has already provoked a rival Alpha and instigated a diplomatic crisis. She cannot be our Luna. His gaze flickered to Evangeline, filled with a mixture of pity and disdain. The role of the Luna is to be a symbol of grace, fertility, and calm. She is meant to soothe the pack, not incite conflict. Lady Evangeline defended her own honor, and that of this kingdom, with more courage than some of the warriors on your own council, Sebastian countered, his voice low and dangerous despite his weakness. Her mind is the sharpest weapon we possess. I will not see it blunted to fit your outdated traditions. But she is an Omega, another lord, a portly alpha named Borin, protested. Her instincts will be to submit, to nest. She cannot possibly continue in her role as an advisor. The duties are incompatible. The pack will not accept it. They will see her as a weakness at your side, a liability. Evangeline sat perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap, her face an unreadable mask. But inside, every word was a fresh wound. Liability. Weakness. Incompatible. They were seeing her exactly as she had feared, a problem to be managed, a disruption to the natural order. The 10 years she had spent proving her worth, building her reputation, had evaporated. All they saw now was her designation. They wanted to put her in a gilded cage, to parade her out at ceremonies, and then lock her away where her inconvenient intellect and newfound instincts wouldn't trouble them. She felt Sebastian's anger rise, a palpable heat in the room. He was about to unleash his alpha command on them, to force their obedience. But she subtly shook her head, a minute gesture only he would catch. This was not a fight he could win with dominance. Forcing the council to accept her would only breed deeper resentment. She caught his eye, and in that silent communication they'd perfected over a decade, she told him, "Let me handle this." "If I may, Your Majesty," she said, her voice calm and clear. The council members turned to her, surprise evident on their faces. Omegas did not speak unbidden in council meetings. "Lady Evangeline," Valerius began, but she continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Lord Valerius, you claim my instincts are incompatible with my duties. Tell me, what instincts do you believe I possess?" He sputtered. "Well, to submit, to seek comfort and protection, to nest and bear young." "I see," she said pleasantly. "And in the 10 years I've served this kingdom, have you ever seen me exhibit those behaviors during council meetings? Have I once sought comfort when we were debating strategy? Did I nest during the northern border crisis?" "That was before you knew my designation," she finished. "So the issue is not my behavior, which has not changed. The issue is your perception. You see an Omega and you assume weakness. You assume I am suddenly incapable of the work I've been doing successfully for a decade." She stood, moving to stand before the council with the same confidence she'd always possessed. "My designation does not define my capabilities, gentlemen. If anything, it enhances them. I can now sense the emotional undercurrents in a negotiation that I could only guess at before. I can detect deception, anxiety, aggression, all useful tools for a diplomat." She let that sink in. "You say the pack will see me as a weakness? I say you underestimate the pack. They will see what they have always seen. The woman who helped negotiate the Eastern Grain Treaty that saved hundreds from starvation. The advisor who prevented Lord Corven's rebellion before it could begin. The strategist who has protected this kingdom's interests for 10 years. She turned to face Valerius directly. "You want me to be decorative and silent. I understand. It's what you're comfortable with. But comfort and progress are rarely compatible. The world is changing, Lord Valerius. The question is whether you'll change with it or be left behind." The room was silent. Then Sebastian spoke, his voice carrying quiet authority. "Lady Evangeline will remain my advisor. She will be my Luna. And she will help me lead this kingdom into the future. Those who cannot accept this are welcome to retire from the council with full honors." It was a dismissal and a threat wrapped in silk. Accept her or leave. The council members looked at each other, uncertainty written on their faces. Finally, Lord Valerius nodded stiffly. "As you command, Your Majesty." But Evangeline could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe she could do it. None of them did. And she would have to prove herself all over again. Later, after the council had departed, grumbling but temporarily silenced, Sebastian reached for her hand. She moved back to sit beside him on the bed, letting him pull her close. "You were magnificent," he murmured into her hair. "I was terrified," she admitted. "They're right about one thing. The pack won't accept me easily. I'm asking them to overturn centuries of tradition." "Then we'll show them a new tradition," he said firmly. "You and me, together. A partnership of equals." She wanted to believe him, but she'd seen the looks on the council members' faces. This was going to be a battle, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to fight it. As if reading her thoughts, Sebastian tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "I love you, Evangeline. Not just because you're my mate, because you're you. The woman who makes me laugh with her dry wit, the person who knows exactly what I'm thinking before I say it. The partner I've been waiting for my entire life without knowing it." He kissed her softly. "We'll face this together, and we'll win, because we're stronger together than apart." She kissed him back, letting herself believe, letting herself hope. Maybe they could do this. Maybe love really was enough. But first, she had to figure out how to be herself in a world that wanted her to be someone else entirely. The weight of Sebastian's promise sat upon Evangeline's shoulders like a royal mantle, both heavy and precious. He wanted to redefine the role of Luna for her, to make a place for the woman he saw, not the Omega the world wanted to see. The sentiment was breathtaking, but the reality was a political minefield. She saw the path ahead clearly, a strategist mapping a battlefield. If she accepted, every move she made would be scrutinized. Every piece of advice she gave Sebastian would be viewed as an Omega's emotional manipulation. Her successes would be attributed to his favor, her failures would be proof of her unsuitability. She would become the focal point for every dissatisfied faction in the kingdom. As she sat by his bed during his recovery, the quiet moments were often pierced by the echoes of the council's words. Liability. Weakness. The old fear, the one she thought she had conquered, whispered that they were right. Perhaps her trauma had broken something essential in her. A proper Omega would have presented at 16. A proper Omega would feel a deep, instinctual need to nest and nurture, not to draft treaties and deconstruct an opponent's political strategy. Her new wolf was a confusing presence. It yearned for Sebastian with a purity that was stunning, finding deep contentment just in his presence. It felt a fierce, protective surge whenever he seemed tired or in pain. But it also listened with rapt attention when he discussed matters of state, and it felt a thrill of victory when he used one of her old arguments to counter a point from his counsel. Her wolf was not at odds with her mind. They were two parts of a whole she was only just beginning to understand. One afternoon, while Sebastian was sleeping, she found herself pacing the length of his chambers. The restlessness was a physical ache. She needed to do something, to be useful. Her eyes fell on a stack of missives on a side table, reports from the border scouts near the Stonefang territory. Victor would not have taken his humiliation quietly. He would be plotting something. Without thinking, she picked them up. Her eyes scanned the pages, her mind automatically filtering the information, searching for patterns. Troop movements disguised as hunting parties. Increased patrols along the river. A sudden halt in trade caravans. It was a classic prelude to an invasion. He was going to use the broken treaty as a pretext for war. Panic flared, but it was the familiar panic of a strategist, not the helpless fear of a victim. She began to cross-reference the reports, spreading them out on a large table, her mind clicking back into its old, comfortable rhythm. She was so engrossed she didn't hear Sebastian stir. Finding something interesting? His voice, stronger now, made her jump. She turned, the scrolls clutched in her hand. "Sebastian, you should be resting." "I've been resting for a week. I'm going mad," he said, swinging his legs carefully over the side of the bed. He was still bandaged, but color had returned to his face. He stood, a little unsteady, and walked toward her. His eyes weren't on her, but on the papers spread across the table. "What is it?" "It's Victor," she said, her voice crisp and professional, falling back into the comfortable rhythm of their old partnership. He's preparing to move on the Northern Territories. The signs are all there. He's creating a blockade under the guise of security patrols. He'll claim we broke the treaty first and use it as justification to seize the mines. Sebastian looked over her analysis, his expression growing grim. He nodded slowly, and she felt a surge of satisfaction. He saw it too, saw the patterns she'd identified. This is brilliant work, Evangeline. You saw this when my own commanders did not. He looked at her then, and the admiration in his eyes was for the advisor, for the strategist. It was the look she had worked her entire life to earn, and it warmed her more than any pretty words could have. And in that moment, something inside her settled. This was who she was, the mind and the wolf, the advisor and the mate. They were not separate things fighting for dominance. They were pieces of a whole, finally revealed. He trusted her mind. He cherished her wolf. He loved her, not in spite of her complexity, but because of it. The council could see only one facet, but he saw all of her. The council believes my instincts are a liability, she said softly, testing the words. They think all I am good for now is soothing. Sebastian's expression hardened. He took the scrolls from her hands, setting them aside with deliberate care. He cupped her face, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. His touch was warm, grounding. His gaze was unwavering. My wolf has been a storm my entire life. A barely contained force of nature that I have had to wrestle into submission every single day to be the king I need to be. His voice dropped to a low, intimate murmur. Since your scent changed, since I knew you were mine, that storm has been quiet for the first time. Your presence soothes my wolf, yes, but it does not dull it. It focuses it. It makes me stronger. He leaned closer until she could feel his breath against her lips. Your calm allows my mind to be clearer. Your insight, he gestured to the table, protects my kingdom. Your strength challenges me to be better. How is any of that a liability? He pressed his forehead to hers, that gesture of intimacy that had become theirs. I need you, Evangeline. All of you. The brilliant advisor who sees 3 moves ahead. The fierce woman who told Victor Crane to throw himself to the vultures. The Omega who makes my wolf finally understand what peace feels like. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. I need my queen. The last barrier around her heart crumbled. The fear, the doubt, the echoes of the council's scorn, they all faded away, silenced by the raw, unshakable truth in his eyes. He wasn't offering her a gilded cage. He was offering her a throne beside his. He was not asking her to be less. He was empowering her to be more. She had been so afraid of losing herself to the role of Luna, she hadn't realized that with him, she was finally becoming whole. Okay, she whispered, a tear of pure, unadulterated relief sliding down her temple. He caught it with his thumb, his touch infinitely gentle. Okay? He asked, a hopeful smile gracing his lips for the first time in days. She pulled back just enough to look him in the eye, her own gaze clear and certain. Yes, I choose you, Sebastian. I choose this. She took a shaky breath. But we do it my way, together, as equals. A brilliant, dazzling smile broke across his face, lighting up his eyes. I wouldn't have it any other way. And then he kissed her, and it was different from the gentle kiss they'd shared before. This one was deeper, more urgent, full of promise and heat and the desperate relief of 2 people who'd almost lost each other. His hands slid into her hair, holding her close, and she melted into him, her own hands gripping his shoulders. The bond between them flared, golden and bright, and she felt his love pouring through it, felt her own love answering. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, his eyes had gone gold again, and she was trembling. I love you, she said, the words coming easier now. I love you so much it terrifies me. I love you too, he replied, his voice rough. and we'll face that terror together." The decision, once made, settled in Evangeline's soul like bedrock. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, steely determination. Sebastian's joy was a palpable thing, a light that seemed to accelerate his healing. He was up and walking within days, the kingly authority returning to his posture, but now it was tempered with a new softness whenever he looked at her. They were a team. The first order of business was Victor Crane. Using Evangeline's analysis, Sebastian convened an emergency war council. This time, he did not ask her to sit by the side. He placed a chair for her at the table, directly to his right, a position of honor and authority no Luna had ever occupied. The council lords bristled. Lord Valerius opened his mouth to protest, but Sebastian silenced him with a single, cold look. "Lady Evangeline brings the intelligence," he announced to the room. "She will be part of this council. Her voice will be heard. That is final." There was no room for argument. Evangeline, her composure absolute, unrolled the maps and began her briefing. She laid out Victor's strategy with chilling precision, predicting his movements, identifying his weaknesses. She spoke with the same authority and clarity she had always possessed, but now there was a new undercurrent of power in her voice. The Omega in her, bonded and secure, projected a quiet confidence that was impossible to ignore. The Alphas in the room, conditioned to respond to such signals, found themselves listening despite their prejudices, their initial hostility slowly giving way to grudging respect. She was not just the king's mate, she was a master strategist, and denying that would be denying reality. By the end of the meeting, they had a comprehensive plan to counter Victor's aggression, a plan largely of her design. As the council filed out, their expressions were no longer disdainful, but thoughtful. She'd won the first battle, not with submission or charm, but with competence. Sebastian caught her hand under the table, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "That," he said, his voice thick with pride, "is my queen." She squeezed his hand back, allowing herself a small smile. But she knew the war was far from over. But a quiet victory in the war room was not the same as winning the hearts of the kingdom. The court was buzzing with rumors. The story of her late presentation, of the king's injury, of her constant presence in his chambers, had spun into 100 different tales. She was a seductress who had used her Omega wiles to ensnare the king. She was a bad omen, a harbinger of war. She was a fragile, traumatized creature, unfit for any public role. Sebastian knew they had to make a public statement. They had to claim their bond before the entire kingdom and formally announce their intentions. He decided to do it at the annual Harvest Gala, a major event that would be attended by nobles from every territory. It was the perfect stage. The night of the gala, Evangeline stood before the mirror in the chambers that were now hers, adjoining the king's. A gown of deep sapphire silk had been laid out for her, a color that matched Sebastian's royal standard. It was beautiful, all flowing fabric and delicate beadwork, but it felt like a costume, the traditional attire for a Luna-to-be. She touched the soft fabric, a flicker of the old uncertainty returning. Was she about to step into the very role she had feared? Was she trading her identity for acceptance? Sebastian entered without knocking, his presence filling the room. He stopped dead when he saw her standing there in her simple shift, the gown untouched on the bed. He was dressed in his formal black uniform, adorned with his silver Alpha King insignia. He looked every inch the powerful monarch, but his eyes were only for her. "Evangeline," he breathed, his voice filled with reverence. "You are magnificent." He walked toward her, his gaze sweeping over her. Then he saw the gown, saw the uncertainty in her eyes, and understanding dawned on his face. "That is not you." He glanced at the gown. "This is what they expect. It is not what I want." He went to her wardrobe and pulled out a different outfit, one she had commissioned herself weeks ago for a diplomatic dinner that had never happened. It was a tailored jacket and trousers of deep charcoal gray, exquisitely cut, designed for authority and movement, not for display. It was the uniform of an advisor, of a stateswoman. It was her. "Wear this," he said, his eyes serious. "Show them who you are, not who they want you to be." Tears pricked her eyes. He understood. He truly, deeply understood. This wasn't about rebellion or making a statement. It was about being seen. About refusing to disappear into a role that would erase everything she was. She changed quickly, and when she emerged in the charcoal suit, she felt like herself again. Powerful, confident, ready. Sebastian's breath caught when he saw her. He crossed to her in 2 strides, his hands framing her face. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he said, and the reverence in his voice made her heart race. "Not despite this, but because of it. Because you refuse to be anything other than yourself." He kissed her, slow and deep, and she felt his love and pride and desire pouring through the bond. When they broke apart, she was breathless and smiling. He offered her his arm. "It is time to meet our public." She took it, and together they walked toward the ballroom, toward their future. They descended the grand staircase into the ballroom together. A hush fell over the crowd. All eyes turned to them. She saw the confusion on their faces as they took in her attire. She was not dressed as a Luna. She was dressed as a diplomat, as an equal to the man beside her. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. She heard snippets. "Is that the Omega? She's wearing trousers. Where's her gown?" She stood beside Sebastian on the dais, her back straight, her chin high. Let them whisper. Let them judge. She was done hiding. Sebastian raised a hand for silence, and the room obeyed. "My loyal subjects, my noble lords." His voice rang through the hall, commanding and clear. "For weeks there has been speculation. Today, I will give you truth." He turned and looked at Evangeline, and the love in his eyes was so open, so unguarded, that the entire room could see it. "The moon goddess has finally seen fit to grant me the greatest blessing a wolf can know. She has given me my mate." He took her hand, raising it for all to see. "This is Evangeline Mercer, my mate, my other half." A wave of murmurs went through the crowd. This they had expected, but Sebastian wasn't finished. "Many of you know Lady Evangeline as my most trusted advisor. Her strategic mind has guarded this kingdom for 10 years. She negotiated the Eastern Grain Treaty that saved hundreds from starvation. She prevented Lord Corvin's rebellion before a single drop of blood was shed. She has been invaluable to this kingdom." He let that sink in, let them remember. Then his voice hardened, taking on a tone of absolute authority. "This will not change." The murmurs grew louder. He raised his hand again for silence. "The role of Luna has long been a passive one, a symbol. But in a changing world, we need more than symbols. We need strength. We need wisdom. We need partners who can lead, not just follow." He turned to the crowd, his alpha presence filling the room. "Therefore, I am not merely naming Evangeline my Luna. I am creating a new role for her, for the crown. She will be my queen, yes, but she will also be named the kingdom's first head diplomat, with all the authority and power that title commands. She will continue to serve this kingdom not just as the heart of my pack, but as one of its sharpest minds." A stunned silence greeted his announcement. It was revolutionary, unprecedented. He was making her his equal, not just in private, but in public, codified by law. He had not just made a place for her, he had built her a throne of her own, right beside his. Evangeline felt her heart swell with love for this man, this king who saw her so clearly, who loved her so fiercely that he was willing to upend centuries of tradition for her. The silence in the ballroom stretched, thick with shock and disbelief. She felt the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes on her. They were looking at her not as a romantic figure, not as the king's chosen, but as a political entity, a new and unknown power in the hierarchy. She looked at the faces in the crowd, the stunned nobles, the calculating lords, the curious dignitaries. Lord Valerius's jaw was practically on the floor, his expression one of pure stupefaction. She saw then that Sebastian had not just honored her, he had outmaneuvered them all. By formalizing her power, by giving her an official title beyond Luna, he had legitimized her presence in the council rooms and at the negotiation tables. She would not be the king's Omega offering her opinion. She would be the head diplomat executing her duties. It was a move of political genius, born from love. A slow smile spread across her face. He had seen her fear of being caged and had instead handed her a key to the entire kingdom. Sebastian turned to her, his expression searching, waiting for her response. The public declaration had been his part. The acceptance had to be hers. This was the final, crucial step of the bonding ritual, the public choice that would seal their fates together. She took a breath, steadying herself. Then she stepped forward, turning to face Sebastian fully. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady, amplified by the hall's acoustics and her own newfound power. "Before all witnesses," she began, her eyes locked on his, "I hear your words, Alpha King Sebastian Vane." She dipped her head in a gesture of formal respect, then met his gaze again, her own shining with an emotion that needed no words. "You have seen me when I was invisible. You have honored me when I was dismissed. You have shielded me when I was vulnerable." She took a step closer, her free hand coming up to rest over his heart. She could feel its strong, steady beat beneath her palm, the physical proof of his love. "My wolf recognized you from the first moment, even when my human mind was lost in fear. It knows you as its protector, its anchor, its home." Her voice softened, becoming an intimate vow meant only for him, yet shared with the world. "But this choice is not my wolf's alone. It is mine." She let the crowd see the tears shining in her eyes. Let them see the raw emotion on her face. "I choose you, Sebastian. Not because of fate or destiny, not because the moon goddess willed it, but because of the man you are. Because you make me laugh when I take myself too seriously. Because you trust my mind as much as you cherish my heart. Because you see all of me, the advisor, the survivor, the Omega, the woman, and you love every piece." Her voice grew stronger, more certain. "I choose you as my king, my partner, and my mate. I will stand with you, advise you, and defend this kingdom at your side. I will be your Luna and your head diplomat, your lover and your friend. The bond between us cannot be denied, and I accept it now, freely and wholly. Not as a cage, but as a choice, my choice." As she finished speaking, a collective gasp went through the room. A soft, golden light, far brighter and warmer than the faint, healing glow she'd managed before, began to emanate from her, enveloping them both. It was the magic of a completed mate bond, a visible manifestation of their union, blessed by the moon goddess herself. It was undeniable proof that this was right, that this was meant to be. The magic swirled around them, warm and bright, and in that moment, they were the only two people in the universe. Sebastian's face was alight with a love so profound it stole her breath. He leaned down, one hand cupping her face, the other wrapping around her waist to pull her close. "My mate," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "My queen, my Evangeline." And then he kissed her. Not a chaste, formal kiss for the sake of appearances, but a real kiss, deep and passionate and full of promise. She kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her love and hope and fierce determination into it. The bond between them flared brilliant gold, and she felt his joy and love washing over her through it, felt her own emotions echoing back. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, the golden light slowly faded. She could hear her heart pounding, could feel his racing under her palm. His eyes were molten gold, his wolf at the surface, and she knew her own eyes must be glowing with the same otherworldly light. The silence broke. It started with a single person clapping, one of the younger betas from the Crimson Guard, the one who'd always been kind to her. Then another joined in, a merchant's daughter she'd helped with a trade dispute. Then a whole section of the court, the younger members who'd grown up in a changing world. Soon the entire ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. It was hesitant at first, then grew in strength and conviction as the reality of what they had witnessed sank in. They were not just witnessing a royal mating. They were witnessing the birth of a new era. Evangeline looked out at the crowd, at the mixture of shock and awe and slowly dawning acceptance on their faces. She saw Lord Valerius, still stunned but no longer disapproving. She saw younger she-wolves looking at her with something like hope in their eyes. She saw the future, uncertain but full of possibility. Sebastian's arm tightened around her waist, and she leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Ready?" he murmured in her ear. "For what?" she asked. "Everything," he said, and smiled. She smiled back. "Together. Always." Later that night, long after the gala had ended and the palace had fallen silent, Sebastian led her by the hand out of the castle and into the royal woods. The full moon hung overhead, a perfect silver disk in the inky sky, bathing the world in ethereal light. "There is one last thing," he said, his eyes glowing with a soft golden light. "Your wolf has been awake for weeks, but it has not yet run free." He was right. In the chaos and politics, in the fear and the healing, she had not yet had her first true shift. Her wolf had been present, whispering in her mind, helping her heal Sebastian, purring with contentment when they were close, but it had not yet been unleashed. He squeezed her hand. "You are not alone this time. Let me see you, Evangeline, all of you." He began to shift, not with the pained violence of a forced change, but with a fluid grace that was breathtaking to behold. Bones lengthened, skin gave way to thick black fur that gleamed like midnight under the moon. And in moments, a magnificent wolf stood before her, larger than any she had ever seen, his eyes the same intelligent warm brown as his human form. He nudged her hand with his massive head, a soft whine of encouragement rumbling in his chest. Her own wolf, which had been pacing restlessly inside her, surged with an answering call. There was no pain, no fear, just a joyful, exhilarating release, like taking off armor she'd worn for so long she'd forgotten it was there. She felt her own bones lengthen, felt her senses explode into clarity. The world resolved into a million shades of gray and silver, a billion different scents. The damp earth, the pine needles, the small creatures rustling in the underbrush. And Sebastian. His scent was everywhere, warm and safe and home. She was on 4 paws, her body thrumming with a power she had never imagined. Her fur was the color of rich cream, pale and luminous under the moonlight. She looked at her paws in wonder, then up at the magnificent black wolf who was her mate. He bumped his nose gently against hers, a gesture of welcome and love that needed no words. Then he turned and bounded into the trees, looking back over his shoulder. His meaning was clear. "Run with me." She didn't hesitate. She pushed off, her powerful new muscles propelling her forward with effortless speed. The feeling was glorious, a freedom so absolute it was like flying. The wind rushed through her fur, the ground flew beneath her paws, and for the first time in her life, truly for the first time, she felt completely, utterly free. They ran side by side through the forest, a black shadow and a streak of moonlight weaving between ancient trees. He was faster, stronger, but he matched his pace to hers, always staying close. They chased each other in circles, playful and joyful. He nipped at her heels and she batted at his nose. They were not king and advisor, not alpha and omega. They were just 2 wolves, 2 halves of a single soul, finally whole, finally free, running together under the moon. They ran for hours, until her muscles burned with pleasant exhaustion and the sky was beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn. Finally, they collapsed together in a clearing, their sides heaving. He curled around her protectively, his massive body warm against hers, and she felt safer than she'd ever felt in her life. As the sun began to rise, casting the world in shades of pink and gold, they shifted back. She found herself cradled against Sebastian's bare chest, his arms wrapped around her, his chin resting on top of her head. "That was," she began, but couldn't find the words. "Perfect," he finished for her. "Yes," she agreed, smiling against his skin. They lay there in the growing light, wrapped in each other, the bond between them humming with contentment. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now. "I love you too," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Ready to face the council tomorrow?" She laughed. "With you? Always." 6 months later, the scent of pine and damp earth filled the air of the neutral territory of the Silverwood Glade. Luna Evangeline, head diplomat of the United Pax, looked across the negotiation table. On the other side sat a new alpha from the Stonefang Pack, a sober-faced wolf named Garrick, who had overthrown Victor Crane after his disastrous and swiftly defeated attempt at an invasion. The victory had been decisive. Victor, overconfident and outmaneuvered at every turn by Evangeline's strategy, had been cornered in the Stonefang mines, the very prize he'd sought. When his own beta, Garrick, had turned on him and demanded his surrender, Victor had chosen exile over submission. The council had stripped his title by dawn. Victor was now a rogue, stripped of his title and territory, a cautionary tale whispered in pack circles. Evangeline slid a newly drafted treaty across the table. It was similar to her original masterpiece, but stronger, fairer, and with new clauses for mutual defense and economic cooperation. "The terms are clear, Alpha Garrick," she said, her voice calm and firm. "We offer peace and partnership, not subjugation. The Alpha King believes our kingdoms are stronger together." Garrick studied the document, his expression unreadable. Beside him, his beta advisor leaned in, whispering. Evangeline waited patiently. She had learned over the past 6 months that true power wasn't in speaking the loudest, but in knowing when to be silent, when to listen, when to let others come to the right conclusion on their own. A large, warm hand settled on her shoulder, a familiar weight that sent a comforting purr through her inner wolf. Sebastian had been sitting slightly behind her, a silent observer throughout the proceedings. He had insisted on accompanying her, not to oversee her work, but simply to be with her. His presence was not a check on her authority, but a quiet statement of support. He trusted her completely, and everyone in the room knew it. Garrick finally looked up, meeting her gaze directly. There was a flicker of awe in his eyes. "The terms are generous, Your Majesty." He addressed her, not Sebastian. He was acknowledging her title, her power, her authority as head diplomat. "The Stonefang Pack accepts." Relief and a deep, satisfying pride washed through Evangeline. This was her victory. Not just the treaty, but the respect she had earned. She was no longer an anomaly or a scandal. She was the queen. After the formalities were concluded and the delegations had departed, she and Sebastian remained at the table in the quiet glade. He pulled her into his lap, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. He nuzzled her neck, inhaling her scent of peaches and jasmine, a scent that still drove his wolf wild with possessive delight. "Head diplomat," he murmured against her skin. "I am very impressed." She leaned back against his solid chest, her contentment a palpable thing. "You shouldn't be. You're the one who appointed me." "I only gave you the title you had already earned 100 times over," he said, his voice sincere. "I just made sure no one could ever question it again." Life in the palace had transformed. The council, having seen the undeniable success of her strategies and the unshakable bond she shared with the king, had fallen in line. Lord Valerius had grudgingly admitted, after her strategy for the northern campaign had saved over 200 lives. "Your tactics were sound, Your Majesty. I may have been hasty in my initial assessment." It was as close to an apology as she was likely to get, and she'd accepted it with grace. The court had followed his lead. Evangeline had become a symbol not of weakness, but of a new kind of strength. Young she-wolves, Beta and Omega alike, now sought positions in the diplomatic corps and the royal council, inspired by the queen who ruled with her intellect. She had not just redefined the role of Luna, she had shattered it and built something better in its place. She turned in his lap to face him, her hands framing his face. The love she felt for him was a vast, steady ocean, deep and endless. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The quiet, before I erupted into your life?" He chuckled, a deep, warm sound that rumbled through his chest. "My life was never quiet, Evangeline." He caught one of her hands, pressing a kiss to her palm. "It was just silent, empty in ways I didn't even realize. You brought the music. You brought the color. You brought me to life." He kissed her then, a slow, tender kiss full of love and respect and the deep, unwavering certainty of the fated mate bond. It was a kiss that promised a lifetime of partnership, of running together under the moon, of building a future they had forged together on their own terms. The Beta who had spent 10 years being invisible, the Omega who had been revealed in a moment of crisis, was now the most powerful woman in the kingdom. Not because she was the Alpha King's mate, but because she was Evangeline. Brilliant, fierce, compassionate, strong, she had faced down her fears, challenged centuries of tradition, and emerged not diminished, but transformed. And she was finally, completely, home. "I love you," she said, pulling back just enough to meet his eyes. "More than I ever thought possible. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed." "You gave me the same," he replied, his eyes soft. "A true partner, an equal, the other half of my soul." "What do you think comes next?" she asked. "For us?" He smiled, that brilliant smile that still made her heart skip. "Everything. Whatever we want. We'll build it together." "Together," she echoed, smiling back. "I like the sound of that." And as the sun set over the silverwood glade, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, the Alpha King and his queen sat together in the quiet peace they had fought so hard to earn. Two halves of one soul. Two wolves who had found their way home. Together. Always.